last week we spent talking about government, and I got to thinking about what we talked about in some of our discussion. I thought, okay, I think I'm gonna slow her down even more a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit more on some things, because I think that some of the, I won't say philosophy, but just some of the little pieces of, who we are as people and how we process things and different stuff. I think we might want to talk about that before we start moving on to the issues. So we understand who we are and what we can do, what we can't do, and some of almost tied into when we were talking about choices. Do our choices really matter? We might talk about that a little bit more today, because I think it's kind of important. We just linger on that topic for maybe another week here. So I got a couple questions I'm going to throw out to you, and we'll see where we end up, okay? So what does God expect of citizens in a theocracy? So what's a theocracy? You guys know what a theocracy is? A theocracy is who's in charge? Who's at the top of the theocracy? God. Okay. God, the deity. So you can have a theocracy be like ancient Israel, right? And who's the top in ancient Israel? Yahweh, okay, God is, right? But you go to Babylon, or you go to some of these others, they have a deity, might be a theocracy, and who's the top? Could be Marduk, could be Zeus, could be whoever, right? So depending on the civilization, in a theocracy, the deity is the top. So what does God expect of citizens in a setup like that? Do the citizens have any impact on society in a theocracy? Well, yeah, because if they obey, then the idea is the deity is happy and the society is blessed. And if they disobey, the deity is angry and society is cursed. So they still have some impact on how society goes, even in a theocracy, right? What about in a monarchy? What's a monarchy? King. You've got a king in charge. So you have a head, a human being at the head, right? King, queen, something like that. What's the citizen's responsibility in a monarchy? What does God expect of them? Okay. Obey the king, submit to the king. Okay. What else? Anything else?
Support the king.
Support the king. Servitude. What about just morally? What's the expectation of the citizens in a monarchy? Is it any different than a theocracy?
Not really.
They're supposed to still do what's right, walk humbly, use mercy, righteousness, right? It doesn't change, does it? So the citizens still have to make good decisions, and they still have to do what's right, even in these two systems, right? Which is not what the United States is. What about in a democracy? What does God expect of citizens in a democracy? Now the same thing, what's the difference between the democracy and the other two?
We have a voice.
Yeah, the democracy really makes the people the ultimate power, right? Now this is why I'm throwing this out there, is because I'm going to submit to you today that the first two, the people still have the power. I know it sounds kind of weird in a theocracy and a monarchy that you would say, wait a second, how do the citizens have any power when there's a king or a deity in charge? But I'm going to show you that biblically, that democracy is what's promoted. Even though that's not what they had, that's what kind of indirectly is promoted or shown in the biblical story, even in the Old Testament. So it doesn't change the fact that in all of these, what does God expect of the citizens? Obedience to who? To God, and what's right and what's moral and what's true. Those are things that have to kind of undergird any of these, or things will get off track, right? Is it reasonable to believe he expects the same thing regardless of the government type?
Yes.
Now there may be, we're going to look at it in a second, greater responsibilities on citizens depending on which one you're in. Which we could argue, maybe that's not even true. We're going to look at that a little bit. Because when you have the power, what do you do with it? Because a lot of times people say, well, we don't have any power. I don't have any power because I live under a king. I don't have any power because I'm in this type of system. Well, let's look at that. Let's see what kind of power existed in the Bible. Okay. So that's kind of this question. Is there a different level of responsibility in these different forms of government? To some degree, probably. If you don't have a king or a theocracy where it's all about the people making decisions, do the people carry a greater responsibility? It would seem so. if it came down to us deciding versus this king over here who's by lineage or whatever makes the decision, right? So let's look at this. Luke 12, verse 48. And from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be demanded. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will ask him for even more. What's the principle here? And so if you've been given much, much will be demanded. If you've been given a lot of power, you've been put in a position of authority, are you going to be expected of more than someone who's not?
Yes.
Okay, I kind of look at this from like a pastoral perspective. People come in and they sit down in the office and they say, I have a question on this thing in life. And I have a lot of responsibility. Because there's a lot of people, I don't know that I necessarily like it. I'd like to undo it in the minds of everybody. They think pastors somehow have a step up on the common person. We do not. We are human like everybody else. You all know that. We make as much, we just, they come to you for counsel, but I have a greater responsibility because there's people that look to me for advice or for counsel. And if I give them something wrong, it could lead them off a cliff. Is that greater responsibility than someone who just comes and gets to sit and take in the service, would you say? Now, we all carry that to some degree because we all have people that come to us. But from a church perspective, and even the organizational perspective, I carry a certain amount of responsibility. And so much has been given. So God says, much is going to be required. Much will be demanded.
And that's the same with teachers.
Teachers? So my question is, what about citizens? What about citizens in a environment, argue how you want that it's broken, but it was originally intended that the people would have the power, that we would be the ones who would decide. Have we been given much in that system? What have we been given that's different than the other systems?
Freedom.
Yeah, the ability to vote,
Freedom.
freedom to choose. And so is that a responsibility? Is that a great responsibility? Does every nation and every citizenry have that responsibility or even have that freedom to do those things? No. So is much required, do you think? So the reason I bring this up is because of my question initially, which was, is there a different level of responsibility for people in different systems? It would seem like those who have been given freedom to choose by the system have a greater responsibility. They can't just say, well, the king is the guy in charge. He's been there since his dad. And you know what's interesting is when you look at the governments of the world, you think of Great Britain. How did it start? I mean, how was it originally set up? King, right? You had the monarchy. Are they a monarchy now? They still have kings and princes and stuff. But what's the role of the king or the queen now?
It's just
Yeah, it's like a figurehead. It's almost like a symbolic ceremonial thing. What have they adopted? Parliament, which is kind of like democracy to some degree, right? So what Christians have been given, well, if you live here, you've been given some freedoms, right? What is it that we as parents have been given? Responsibility? You've been entrusted with something? Your kids count on you doing the right thing, making the right decisions so that they can learn, they can be taught. Here's a question. Does one's responsibility depend to a degree on the amount of freedom they possess?
yeah.
If you have more freedom, do you have more responsibility?
Sure.
These are kind of common sense question and answer, really. But I think it's important for us to know that if we have a certain amount of freedom, we do maintain a certain amount of responsibility to use that freedom in an appropriate manner. Does democracy exist to a degree even in non-democratic systems of government? Now, this is kind of a weird question, but I'm going to throw it out there that I think it does. Do you think that the founders had it in mind? I mean, when they came here, and they set up their government, what was their guiding post for how to set it up? People lead. So democracy, we want the people to decide, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But remember, what was the things they wanted for people to have? Life, liberty, freedom, pursuit of happiness. Live a quiet and peaceful life if you want to, believe the things you want to believe, have ultimate freedom. It's kind of it. I mean, there's not, when I say ultimate freedom, there's some boundaries. You can't kill your neighbor, right? You're not supposed to steal their stuff. And you don't have the freedom to break moral laws. You shouldn't, right? So those things were still out there. But you are going to be the person who got to decide how you lived, what you did. You get to decide who's in charge. You get to put the people that we need government to just make sure some rules are enforced. Remember what Romans 13 said? Government's there to reward good, punish evil, punish wickedness. You do need somebody to do that, or what will happen? Anarchy, chaos, survival of the fittest, right? So it really comes down to a question of authority, doesn't it? You put people in power. People that have power have a tendency to want more power, don't they? You know, there's an ancient, I think he was a British philosopher that said, you know, people want more power, but that corrupts you, and so ultimate power ultimately corrupts. You know, it just becomes worse and worse and worse because human beings want more and more power, which is a problem. Let's look at this. This is in 1 Kings. There's a story. And Solomon slept with his ancestors, and they buried him in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son became king in his place. So here we have Israel, which was supposed to be a theocracy. Remember, God told Samuel, it's me, and they said, give us a king, remember? And they said what? No, we'll take God. No, that's not what they said. Give us a king like everybody else. And so God says, well, if you do that, they're going to take your kids, they're going to take your money, they're going to do all these things to you because they are king now. They think they have the ability and they have to run their deal. And they said, hey, we don't care. We'll do it. We'll give our sons, we'll give our money, it doesn't matter. And so he says, okay. And then, boom, they get a king. So now we're down the road a little ways. They've had a king. It's supposed to be a theocracy. To some degree, it's kind of a mix. Because who's the king in Israel? Who was the king supposed to look to? What was his standard to enforce? God's law, right? But the king is still the king. So you kind of have a theocracy, but you kind of have a monarchy at the same time. Because you still have a king on the throne. So Solomon's dead. He's gone. His son Rehoboam takes his place. And there's another guy named Jeroboam. Okay, there kind of is a conflict going on in Israel over who should be in charge. And all the assembly of Israel came, and they spoke to Rehoboam, saying, your father made our yoke heavy. Now lighten the hard labor of your father and the heavy yoke which he placed on us, and we will serve you. Okay, we have we'll just call it a monarchy because there's a king in charge. Who's the king here? Rehoboam, Solomon's son. Okay, by lineage, he's now the king. Rehoboam is. And as he's getting ready to take over, what happens here? What's going on here?
They plead for a lighter load.
The people are saying, Solomon worked us to the bone, and our hands to the bone. We want a lighter workload. And Rehoboam is now faced with this, what am I going to do with this? I thought the king had the power. Could he just tell them, we don't care. We'll do what we want. I'm the king. Me as the king and my group who works with me, we will take it into consideration, but we ultimately will decide. Isn't that what they want to do?
That's a dictatorship.
That sounds like a dictatorship. Maybe you could make the case. But in this case, all they would have to do is just say, I'm the king, I'll get to decide, which is exactly what Rehoboam does. So here's what happens. The king Rehoboam consulted with the old men. I love how it says the old men. Who are the old men? These are the wise elders of Israel who had been serving before Solomon, his father, when he was alive, saying, how are you advising me to answer these people? So even the king doesn't have all the answers, does he? He's got to go get some information to figure out what's the best, smartest move here. It's a political tactic. There's other reasons. How are you advising me to answer this people? And they said to him, if you will be a servant today to this people, then you will serve them. And if you answer them and speak good words to them, they will always be your servants. Now, what's going on here? You have a king by lineage who has the ultimate authority. And he's going out and asking the old guys, the old elders, how should I answer these people who in mass, the vast majority of the citizenry is saying, we want lighter loads. Why doesn't he just say, I don't care? Why is he even pursuing this to begin with?
Because he was unsure.
He's unsure, but why does it matter? Why doesn't he just take his kingship and run with it? Why does he care what the people are saying to him? This is a monarchy. He's the highest authority.
He's building relationships with the people.
What happens if he loses them and their support?
They'll rebellion.
They could have a rebellion. There could be all kinds of bad things that happen. So you're telling me, even though he's the king, it doesn't sound like he has all the control he wants, does he? But he rejected the advice of the old men, which they gave him, and he consulted with the youngsters. You like this? They got all the answers. Who had grown up with him. So instead of going to David's advisors when the kingdom was prosperous and growing, he says, forget those old guys. I'm going to my buddies. And he does. Who are serving before him. He said to them, what are you advising that we should reply to this people who spoke to me by saying, lighten the yoke your father put on us? So now he goes to them and says, I'll see, it's good to get good counsel, get both sides, make a good decision. Then the youngsters who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, thus you shall say to this people who spoke to you, your father made your yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. You shall say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's loins. So then, my father loaded a heavy yoke on all of you, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the exact opposite of what the old guys said, which is bring the hammer down even harder, rule with an iron fist. Rehoboam is a really smart guy, so he goes with the elders, right? No, of course he doesn't. Who does he go with? His buddies. When all of Israel saw the king would not listen to them, so when the citizenry of Israel saw the king would not listen to them, the people answered the king saying, what share do we have in David? See who that they're doing now? What are they asking? What's the question tied to? David's not here anymore. This isn't how David would have run things. There is no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, Israel. Okay. Now look to your house, David. Then Israel went to their tents. The Israelites were living in the cities of Judah, and Rehoboam was reigning over them. King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was over the forced labor, and all of Israel cast stones at him, and he died. But King Rehoboam managed to get up on the chariot to flee to Jerusalem, so Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. Who has the control and authority? Who has the power? This is a monarchy, theocracy, whatever you want to call it. And the people chased off the guy who said, no, we're going to bring the hammer down, and we're going to, with scorpions instead of whips. And the people said, you just try it, see what happens. And they killed the guy and chased off Rehoboam. Now, it ultimately ends up with Jeroboam being made their king, and you have 2 tribes in the south and the rest of them in the north. And you have Samaria is where Jeroboam's at, and Rehoboam's in the south, and the whole country splits in half. This is where Israel's divided. And why was it divided? Who ultimately brought this about?
The people.
The people did. And the people did because they rejected Jeroboam. You're not going to burden us anymore. Does that sound at all like democracy in this country founding a little bit? Even just a little? Because I think the founders have read this, maybe, and they understood that in every circumstance, whether you can call this right or wrong, MacArthur might say, well, it was an unjust revolution. They should never have fought against authority. Maybe these guys shouldn't have fought against Rehoboam. He's the king. I mean, they're throwing stones and killing a guy. But there was a point there where the people ultimately, and I think the founders saw this, the people had the power. Enough of them, united in a cause, had the power, right? So look at this. It happened that just when all of Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all of Israel. Not one followed after the house of David except the tribe of Judah alone. So things have kind of taken a turn here, haven't they? Rehoboam is the king in the line. I mean, he's in the line of David. This is David's grandson. Why is he not in charge? Why are the people not embracing him? Because ultimately it came down to, you're not going to just crush us. We're not going to let you crush us. Now you can argue that maybe they were wrong. But in all societies, do we not see this take place at some point? It seems like at some point, no matter where you go in the world, if the government does not have some amount, I think they push the line, would you agree? There's kind of a breaking point where they know if we push too far, the people will come unglued, and then we might pay for it with our lives. But don't they push that line as close as they can?
Yes.
With the idea that there's still a good fear in the hearts of those in charge. Because they know if they push too far, what's going to happen? You're going to have an assassination. I mean, think about Julius Caesar. I mean, you have, even in all of these different government setups throughout the world and throughout history, you had emperors rise and fall because of assassinations and overthrown governments and military coups, and all of these things happen. Because ultimately, if you lose the people, the majority of the people, you're probably in trouble, aren't you? And so you got to keep enough. So here's a question. To whom was King Rehoboam accountable? No one? He's the king? God alone? He was accountable to God, but it appears he was also accountable to the people, because when he goes out there, he's struggling. He's like, get back to the chariots quick, and he's running to the chariot to get out of there, so he's not the next one. Israel did not have elections, yet somehow the people had some significant power. Would you agree?
Yes, they did.
Nobody cast their vote for Rehoboam. But when it came right down to it, it was him or us. It was us, and Rehoboam was going to go. And they end up splitting. Romans 13:4, for he is God's servant for... Who's your in the text? The people is good. So we have to ask the question, what is our good? What is good for us? And this could be all kinds of discussions and debates, and we're going to talk about some of that in a second. But ultimately, from the top view, it comes down to the people saying, our good. They're there for our good. I think that's, the consent of the governed. That's what the founders wrote. With the consent of the governed, for your good, for the people's good. Here's what John Adams said. I've quoted him a couple times now. I think he had another good quote here. We electors, that's us, have an important constitutional power placed in our hands. We have a check upon two branches of the legislature. The power, of electing at stated periods each branch. It becomes necessary to every citizen then to be in some degree a statesman and to examine and judge for himself of the tendency of political principles and measures. So does Adams understand ultimately in this system who makes the decisions and who has the authority? Who makes the call? Now he's not done yet. He says we should take that as a responsibility in this country to be statesmen to some degree so that we can know what we should choose and who we should choose and hold them accountable. And he's not done. On the end of that quote, this is not a separate quote, this is continuation. Let us examine then with a sober, a manly, and a Christian spirit. Let us neglect all party loyalty and advert to facts. Oh, golly, what a concept. And then he says this, let us believe no man to be infallible or impeccable in government any more than in religion. In other words, don't just count on your leaders to tell you how it should be. You should know. Don't just count on your pastors and your priests to tell you. You should know. It falls on who to know? Everybody individually has to know. Is that not a biblical concept? Do you get a pass into heaven because your family was Christian?
No.
Does God look at it that way? You don't have to know. Everyone. Take no man's word against evidence. Wow, that would be this. We should just paste this and put it on the news.
You can get fact checked.
You get fact checked, they'll say this was not accurate. Nor implicitly adopt the sentiments of others who may be deceived themselves and may be interested in deceiving us. I think he was a pretty smart guy, at least in this thing. But the whole point of this is not only do we have a responsibility in his mind, that we should be good statesmen, people who know, and we look at the facts, we do the research, we do our best that we can to say this is the decision, and we don't vote on party lines, we vote based on the truth and the facts. And then he says, make sure you don't take someone's word for it. What do you do instead of that? Somebody makes a claim, what should you go do? Yeah, if it's going to require you making a decision relying on that, you better go verify that's fact. Because people can make bad decisions. They can give you wrong information, can't they? In fact, he even says here, who may be deceived themselves, or there, unfortunately, might be people who want to deceive us. Did you know that?
Yes.
That they have an agenda and they want to push you towards it? Adam is just saying this at the beginning. Don't count on somebody else to tell you what to do. You need to know the truth for yourself. The results. Can the people of a nation make bad decisions? Oh, yeah. Whether good or bad, the people hold the power. So in all these instances, could they have overthrown a good king? I mean, they could. In this case, Rehoboam was not a good king. So it looks like they're the good ones and he's the bad one. People may appeal to the king leaders and ultimately ask them to leave. We're going to ask you to step down. In fact, the founders did that. They made a list of all the things they had against the king that said, this is why we're leaving. And the king didn't take it too well, did he? You're not leaving. And so people may take up arms and have to force the king leaders to leave. Or they may have to repel them if they won't let them be. That happens in history, doesn't it? I mean, it's just a fact. We don't like it. It's sad that it happens, but that's kind of like, why do bad things happen? Because the world is sinful. It's not exactly how God wants it to be, is it? But he hasn't just undone it. He hasn't just wiped it out. He did that one time, saved one guy. Let's try again. So you have to learn to live in a world that's not perfect, don't you? And that means it's made up of people who aren't perfect. But God doesn't seem to give a pass by that. Oh, you live in a sinful world, you're not perfect people. Here's your pass. Doesn't seem to give us one. I just thought this question kind of drove home the point. Why does the government leaders need the loyalty of the military? I mean, have you ever heard of a military coup? If the guys that have the tanks and the guns turn on you, you're in trouble, aren't you? I mean, you can be a king and have the commander authority. It doesn't matter at that point. Like, they will run you over. And so it's really important, even if you said, I don't care about the citizenry, you still need the military, which is made up in places like ours of citizens who volunteer. In some places, like Israel, you have to serve. You're required to do military service. But if you lose them as the king, what happens to you? It's probably not going to go well, is it? So again, people in groups have responsibility and power. It can be good or bad. So let's talk about this issue that seems to kind of undergird that comment of people having the power for just a second. So I want to ask this logic argument, and you tell me if it's legit or not. So I called it a questionable one, right? Man is sinful by nature. Okay? Sinful people make bad decisions. Sinful people, therefore, cannot make good decisions. One of these is not like the rest, right? Which one is not correct? So you're telling me that sinful people can make good decisions. Okay? So that's our question. Because why is this an important question? Maybe I should ask that first. If we say sinful people cannot make good decisions, period,
Then we think, well,
then we might as well just throw our hands up and walk away, right? Is that what God asks us to do? Does he expect us to say, listen, you're a sinful person, throw your hands up, walk away?
No, he expects us to do the opposite.
Yeah, he actually expects the opposite.
Yeah.
I want to show you a couple things. Now, I use this term good decision, but again, it has to be undergirded by this question. How would you know if it was a good or bad decision? There has to be something transcendent to yourself that you would have to know by how to weigh yourself. Isn't that exactly how it began and how it was designed to work? The founder said, there's inalienable rights given by a transcendent, all-powerful being. And these are them. So we are accountable ultimately to him because he's the one who gave you life and liberty and the ability to pursue these things. Look at this in Genesis. You've heard this story. Abel became a keeper of sheep and Cain became a tiller of the ground. And in the course of time, Cain brought an offering from the fruit of the ground to Yahweh. And Abel also brought an offering from the choicest firstlings of his flock. And Yahweh looked with favor to Abel and to his offspring, but to Cain and to his offspring he did not look with favor. And Cain became very angry, and his face fell. And Yahweh said to Cain, why are you angry, and why is your face fallen? If you do well, will I not accept you? You've heard this story, right? Cain and Abel. We know where it's going. Doesn't end well.
So was it his attitude?
So here's my question. Both men were sons of Adam, both sinful by nature. Agreed? Abel did what was right in the sight of God. Agreed? Cain did what was wrong in the sight of God. Agreed?
Yeah.
But remember, we're going back to the very first statement here. Both men were sons of Adam, sinful by nature. And yet we have two outcomes, don't we? We don't have two bad guys, sinful by nature, doing bad things. You actually have one guy who's sinful by nature doing a bad thing, and one guy who's sinful by nature doing a good thing. How is that possible?
He chose to obey.
How can this be if sinful people cannot make good decisions?
Freedom of choice.
And they can be good choices or bad choices? He says this after they have this discussion. This is before he kills his brother. God says, but if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Even though you have two sinful men, what's God's instruction to Cain here?
You had to choose.
You have to take the bad stuff and dominate it. You have the ability to make a good choice. He doesn't give him a pass and say, well, Cain, you didn't really have an option because your dad, he was sinful. He passed it to you. Sorry. He doesn't do that, does he? So my question is this possible? When he says you must rule over it, are you telling me that I can rule over sin? I thought I didn't have the ability to do that. I thought by nature I was sinful. I think we've put too much in the hands of our sinful nature. I'm not saying that from a spiritual standpoint that we have anything to offer God. We are completely depraved. We've been talking about that on Sunday mornings. So from God we have nothing but dirty rags even in our best day. But when it comes to navigating our world and making decisions as we go about, can we only make bad decisions? Doesn't seem to be the case. Scripturally, biblically, bad people made a lot of good decisions. Cain decided to kill Abel. Bad decision, right? Even though God had just told him, sin's crouching at the door. You have to rule over it. He lost. Could he have chosen differently, or was his sinful nature too much to overcome in this instance?
He could have chosen different.
I mean, he definitely got some punishment for this, right? Did God not hold him accountable for killing his brother? So if he couldn't have chosen, would it have been just for God to hold him accountable? How did Abel do what was right?
He had to go to the Lord.
He obviously valued what God said more than his brother did. He wanted God's approval more than his brother did. He understood what God wanted and said, I will do that. And he did it. And Cain said, I won't. It's really that simple, isn't it? Did God hold Cain accountable for his decision despite his sinful nature, or give him a pass as not really having a choice due to his fallen nature? Oh, he held him accountable. Everybody wanted to kill him after this too, so even if God wasn't going to, who else was going to try to hold him accountable? He had to put a mark on him. Don't kill this guy. You have to think, Adam and Eve probably had a lot of kids by this point. And if you just found out that your brother Abel's just got murdered by your other brother, and there's 1,000 of you now, or hundreds of you, and you got your grandkids, and those people live to be hundreds of years old. There could have been an army of family members being like, who killed Abel? Oh, it was Cain? We're going to get him. And so God says, no, you can't kill him. I'm not going to let you kill him. Here's another question. Does God hold people accountable who know the right thing to do and yet choose to do wrong? Absolutely. These sound like fundamental questions, but they're just true, aren't they? Does God hold people accountable who know the right thing to do and yet choose to do nothing? It's a little different, isn't it? There's actually a verse about this. Therefore, to the one who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. In other words, if I know what I should do, I have the freedom to do it, the responsibility to do it, and I know what it is, and I say, I will not do it. What is God's response to that? You chose poorly. You chose poorly. Sitting on the fence doesn't work with God, does it? It's a choice. Even sitting on the fence. We talked about that week 1. So what is our responsibility in our country today? Now that we've been through this, do we have a responsibility as citizens in this particular country that the government has said, by its own creation, by its own setup and how it was designed, is it involving us? Does it involve us? Now we can argue about how broken it is, but I'm just talking about what it is and what we're supposed to do in it. And it compels us. In fact, it even, like Jason was saying, duty was a lot of what the founders said. Not only do you have it before you as an option, but you should take advantage of it. You have a duty to do it. If we can stand up against evil, should we? What if we don't think it's going to matter? What if you know in the end it's not going to result in the thing you want? Should you just say, I'm not going to stand up against it? Should we work to restrain evil or just let it run loose? What if we know in the end evil's still going to get ahead of us? But we're a mess right now as a country. We have morality all over the place, don't we? So my question is if we know it's going to steamroll, that morality is going to keep going south, and it's going to keep going towards the bad, do we just say, as Christians, as citizens, as people? I mean, we're going to have the next week is abortion. We're going to talk about it. But what I want to undergird here is the fact that we may have disagreements on what is evil, but does anybody in here think it's okay to torture babies for fun? How do we agree? Is it okay to slaughter 20 million Jews? How did the world agree on that? There are certain principles that you can't get away from. Even you could go find an atheist on the corner. I've watched this with apologetics as I've studied it, that go up to the most godless person you could say and say, do you think it's okay to torture babies for fun? And they go, I don't think that's okay. Well, but by what manner? So there is an underlying morality that exists, regardless of if we want to say it exists or not. Even the wicked governments of the world operate under it. They don't even realize it half the time. It's strange how that exists within us, almost by nature. I know it sounds weird, but it's like it's just imprinted on us somewhere. We can't escape it, can we? You think about your kids. How important are your kids? They're important, aren't they? Would you stand up for your kids against all odds? Yes. Why? What if you knew you were going to lose? What if you knew it was not going to end well anyway? Would you still stand up for them? Why? Well, is that principle apply to more than just the kids then? Or is it only for kids? What about things you love, things that are good, things that you want to see have a future, things that you can see maybe if we do this right, we stand up for it, they'll be better on the other side if we can just get enough people to do that. the kids will be better. Society will be better. And so to make the argument that it's just me and I can't do anything, even if it is, do it anyway. And again, a lot of Christians fall on this one. The Bible says it's going to just get worse, so let's just usher in the second coming. Let it get bad. What about my boys? What about mine? I mean, that's what I think about. I could just let it go by and say, come quickly, Lord Jesus. I agree. But that doesn't, tomorrow when I have to make a decision to decide what they're going to watch on TV or what they're going to be exposed to, I still have to decide stuff. And I can either push back against evil or I can say, whatever, let them just be exposed to whatever. Does evil take this approach against the good? Good always seems to take this approach against the evil. I don't know. We're too divided. We can't ever agree. And evil goes, perfect.
Divide and conquer.
Well, it's ironic because what did Jesus say? But knowing their thoughts, he said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and every city or household divided against itself will not stand. And if Satan expels Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand? Does Satan understand this principle? 100%. And so we can't let that become a reason to say, I can't decide. It doesn't matter. One more thing I wanted you to consider before I let you go. There's a story in 1 Kings I've been thinking about this week. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Remember, there's a big problem going on. Elijah just went in and just took out all these prophets of Baal. Okay, there's been this problem. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, thus may the gods do to me, and may they add to it. Surely at this time tomorrow I will make your life as the life of one of them. Then he became afraid, got up, and he fled for his life. So Elijah takes out their prophets, and Jezebel says, how dare you? And then she basically calls down curses on herself if she doesn't kill him tomorrow. That's a little scary coming from basically the highest authority next to Ahab, right? And what's Elijah's response? I got to get the heck out of here, right? He's gone. Look what happens. He has this discussion with God, and then it says, a voice came to him and said, Elijah, why are you here? He's hiding in a cave. And he said, I have been very zealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, demolished your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. What is Elijah's attitude towards his country in the future? It looks real bad. They've killed everybody. I'm the only one out there with the voice of reason, with the voice of the truth. And is he discouraged? You bet he is. He's in a cave. He's fearful, he's discouraged, and he thinks he's the only one left. Paul actually quotes this story in Romans. And look what he says. Do you not know in the passage about Elijah what the scripture says? How he appeals to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets, they have torn down your altars, and I alone am left, and they are seeking my life. And then he says this. But what does the divine response say to him? I have left for myself 7,000 people who have not bent a knee to Baal. Did Elijah know that? He thought that. He assumed that. But it's not true, is it? In fact, God knows that he's got 7,000 people that are right where Elijah is. That's a lot of people. And at the right time in the right place, can the whole society be changed if all those people said, we're done? That's exactly what happened. So despite Elijah's fear, what was the reality of the situation in Israel? There was a lot more than just the one who realized what was going on and sought to make a difference, wanted it to be different. They may have all thought they were the only one, and it didn't matter. But when they got together, there's 7,001 that are set aside, and God knew it. They wouldn't bend a knee. So I hope that to some degree, as I thought about this story, just some little takeaways. We the people have the ability to hold the rulers accountable. Don't think that you're the only one, and so it doesn't matter, and you can't, because that's what Elijah thought, and he was wrong. Is there a chance we could be wrong if we think we're the only one and there's no way we're going to get together on things? We cannot allow ourselves to be discouraged out of participation by what may appear to be a losing battle. I don't care if you think the school's going south, you're going to go to the school board meeting and you're going to tell them what you think if your kids are being put at risk, right? We have been given a freedom and responsibility in America. We should make the most of it the best we can. And we're going to talk about issues because we're all over the board on a lot of the issues. And my goal will be, as we go through them, that we will come back to a fundamental one we could all raise our hand and say, I would agree on that one. Because I think you have to take baby steps to some degree on some of these issues because of how far we've gotten.